You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
All right, hello and welcome to Forward Faster. I'm Chris Carpenter from the marketing team at NextCorps. With me today is Shelby Thompson, Senior Community Manager from SecondMuse, who works with the Scale For ClimateTech team, and Mike Riedlinger, Managing Director from NextCorps and Scale For ClimateTech team member as well. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
So I'm going to jump right in. And so first off, even though Scale For ClimateTech has a new name, the two of you have been kind of part of these programs for the past couple of years now. Could you both, and we can start with Shelby, kind of walk us through how Scale For ClimateTech came together from kind of your side? I know there's kind of a SecondMuse and NextCorps side. So we'll start with you, Shelby.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So I joined the SecondMuse team in July of 2018, right when we had initially signed the contract with NYSERDA to support this program. So I was hired to create the program from the pilot year and the SecondMuse style, which is a very community-oriented program style. So we really wanted to make sure that each of the companies that we brought into the program, and in that first year we were called MCorps, each company that was brought into the program had met the goals of the program as outlined by NYSERDA, as well as were able to join us in a cohort fashion so they could share information with each other, come to workshops in person, making sure the companies could meet together as a cohort, share resources, work together to get their products to market. So I've been with the program since the start, and now on the community side, I'm more focused on making sure that those who have been through the program with us or graduated from the program still have access to resources and can offer their services as expertise now and be mentors for the new cohort cycle.
Cool. And Mike, kind of from the NextCorps side of things, how did this program take shape and to scale?
Well, for NextCorps, for me, I'd been in NextCorps for a long time. Prior to NextCorps, I started up some companies myself, and some were at the predecessor to NextCorps is called High Tech Rochester, which is how I came into that. But I actually started by writing the proposal to NYSERDA to create the program. So it goes back into 2017-ish. For what's now known as Scale For ClimateTech. And that for me, the basis was to take a lot of the lessons learned in my own startups where I just learned from some fairly rough experiences and some good ones too, along with a lot of colleagues that were peers, other entrepreneurs that had been through High Tech Rochester that I'd worked with. So taking that, framing it up, the others, I had done some work with folks over at the RET Golisano Institute for sustainability for other projects I'd worked on. So they became a partner. I had also done some work with the Cornell Center for Materials Research and some of the team members that are at the Rev Center in Ithaca. So they too are partners with us. But took as much of that along with materials I'd been studying from Department of Defense. And that's what sort of formed up our proposal that is now Scale For ClimateTech.
Very cool. So kind of a long time in the making. Mike, you kind of covered a little bit more of your background, but obviously this is a robust program with a bunch of different perspectives and insights, and kind of a unique place to be altogether. But and Mike, again, you walked us through it. Shelby, how did you kind of find your way to the Scale For ClimateTech team?
So I was working already in the hardware community in New York City. I worked for a company called Tomorrow Lab, which is a product design and engineering firm here in Chinatown. So I'd been working with that company since they were a scrappy startup and had really focused my efforts on business management, marketing, and bringing a more inclusive diversity into the staff. So I was looking to add additional female engineers to the staff and started doing some community involvement and got introduced to SecondMuse through a program that was sponsored by the NYC EDC called FutureWorks Incubator. So that program was really designed for early stage companies who were either in ideation or had built maybe a looks like prototype and were looking for support to grow their team, grow their product, learn about the ins and outs of business development, legal, manufacturing, all of those early stage company needs. And so I met the team there and had come to a few workshops. And then when the job opportunity was open, I went for it. And so I joined SecondMuse with same as Mike, a background in early stage companies. I worked for a startup, and a lot of the products that Tomorrow Lab developed were startup friendly products. So I was pretty familiar with the landscape, and it seemed like a really great fit, especially because FutureWorks focuses on the business side and MCorps / Scale for ClimateTech focuses on the manufacturing side. So I felt like I had a lot to learn, but also enough of a background to jump in and make a difference in the program from the start.
Awesome. Well, clearly a good fit. Mike, was there anything, I know you talked a lot about from the kind of through High Tech Rochester and a lot of your previous work with different companies, but was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of your background and kind of how, obviously you were both here when this program came to be, but anything else you wanted to add?
Well, to me, personally, it's very important to protect, let's say, protect the planet. But I think the things that we're collectively doing really make a difference in how are we going to proceed in a world that really needs to change its behaviors and what we're doing relative to energy that's made and used. What are we doing to protect our environment for the future of humanity? It sounds so bold and maybe a little lofty, but I do try to consider what is it that I'm going to be leaving behind as a legacy? What is it that I pass forward? How does that work? And I think it helps to guide the work that we do. So it's well beyond just individual contributions. It's making a difference in the world, which is a motivator for me.
Yeah, for sure, to have those key cornerstones. And the next thing I wanted to expand more on was obviously we had NextCorps and we had Hardware Scaleup and different programs as well. What do you think, I guess, how do you think these partnerships between SecondMuse and NextCorps has improved the program now that it's together as Scale for ClimateTech?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me count the ways. So it's been, it's been just a delight to work with the team at SecondMuse. And there's so many more things that we're talking about for the future. So in particular, having a connection into New York City, because that is the place where if you're looking for corporate partners, if you're really looking for levels of funding that you might call a Series A or Series B kind of funding, if you're looking for a $10 million investment as an example to really grow a company, it's much more likely to happen and be engaged in the New York City area. So working with SecondMuse, it gives us access to that. They've been great partners in connecting people that are in our program upstate to resources that are downstate. The individuals also just working in team to team. There's a whole new set of perspectives that come into how are we connecting with the participants in our program? How are we working with other partners? How can we shape what we collectively do? So these are important elements of working with SecondMuse.
I would agree with a lot of what Mike said. I've always considered our programs to be sister programs. So that really helped frame it from the beginning, that even though we had different names, we were still under the same support of NYSERDA and looking for the same end goal to get these teams, their products to market. So I think for us, because I'd been so ingrained in the New York City hardware ecosystem, it was great to learn more about what the state has to offer. I'm from Tennessee, so my knowledge of New York State was pretty limited to New York City. So getting to meet NextCorps and enjoy going upstate and seeing the capabilities of not just their space and the local manufacturing that's available, but also their relationships to the MEP network, the way that they put together programming with a really academic RIT focused approach and helping utilize the accessibility of those kinds of things that we just don't have easy access to in New York City was really crucial to understanding how we can build out a partnership that's not just sister programs, but a more entwined program. And I think having a universal name and an umbrella name, Scale for ClimateTech, really helped us, merge a lot of our tools, and a lot of our, as Mike said, a lot of our teammates across sharing resources with each of our cohorts, whether they're in New York City or in Rochester, or sometimes in Ithaca or where else in the New York State. So that's been really fun and energizing to see that there's potential across the entire state. And it makes sense as to why NYSERDA wanted us both to be involved so that we could cross the state and really address the needs of all of these companies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely a lot more to New York State than I feel like the average person thinks. So clearly a good part of the success. And both of you guys have, a really in-depth experience with all these companies in the manufacturing sector, both. And I know, Shelby, you're talking a bit more on more the New York City scene, and Mike, your history up here in upstate New York, in Western New York. Do you think, when working with, and Shelby, I'll start with you, when working with downstate teams, what do you think are some of the strengths or kind of normal, or the patterns you're recognizing from the teams that kind of benefit from the New York City hardware scene compared to like the whole state?
Because of things like hardware meetups and the FutureWorks community and other established like group activities, I think New York City had a pretty robust ecosystem. So a lot of the teams could come in, whether they were truly early stage and just getting their feet wet in whether or not their product fits into sustainability and could be a product that we would want to support. They had access to others to sort of have that initial conversation and then meet us more easily because we were also engaged in the ecosystem. The investment opportunities here, as Mike said, are really hands down pretty wide open for companies, especially those who are based in New York City. So if they want to meet a potential investor, then we have access to make those introductions happen and they could have a real-time in-person meeting. I think one of the drawbacks, though, because we're such a huge urban community, that there's a lot of office space available, but very little manufacturing space, especially for companies who are working in ag tech or food waste. The permits to get a place here in New York City were pretty limited especially for a large space outside of some of the properties owned by the NYC EDC or local governments. So I think the upstate team really had access to a lot more space, and we were able to introduce our teams to other areas of New York State so that they could potentially open a facility there, but still have the bulk of their company spend their time in New York City so they could move forward with the rest of their business development.
Yeah, I know you guys kind of covered a little bit of this too. And you mentioned that with Renewable, who's now in Rochester but got much of their grounding in New York City.
And thanks to the upstate team on helping us move that forward. We really were struggling to get the Renewable team a space in New York City that would suit their needs as directly as they have been able to do by the Eastman Business Park.
Nice. And Mike, I know Shelby covered a lot of the upstate stuff too, but what do you think are some of the strengths kind of for the climate tech ecosystem in upstate New York and Western New York?
Well, some of the strengths are that the state actually has just so many resources. One of the projects that we did was inventory of available space for doing light manufacturing, and upstate there's as I recall from a report that we identified something like 19 million square feet that's available that could be divided into sort of smaller areas down to about 500 square feet. So there's just enormous opportunity. And I think there was a corresponding report that I saw from New York, and maybe there's a couple million square feet that was available throughout New York City and Long Island also, right? So having access to other resources for companies to grow, it's available if you go across the state. Likewise, the capital is we've been talking about. So getting enough capital and scaling, going into manufacture requires a lot more capital than many startups even realize until they get further down the path. So those are big deals. I think the other is just the number of manufacturers, and it's always fun to bring the crew up from New York City, and we jointly go on manufacturing tours together. Just to see the types of companies that are working in the state on things that you think otherwise need to be made in other parts of the world altogether. but they're accessible. They're right here, and it's just a tremendous resource.
And down in New York City, for the teams who are, trying to figure out what their in-house assembly would look like, there are a lot of resources for fab labs or other shops that we call them that have, CNC machines in-house or a plethora of 3D printers. And so we have all of those teams connected in a list of the tools and machines that they have in their space, and if they're available for free for rent, a membership. And so folks can actually, make real progress with the mechanical or electrical engineering side of their product development here in New York City, which is pretty exciting when they're getting ready to meet a manufacturer and see what they need to bring to the table for that relationship.
The one other thing I did want to do, though, while we're on this path, is give a shout out to the manufacturers that are in the region, because we do have several participating teams that have entered into, I'd say, deeper partnerships with some manufacturers and have actually set up assembly space inside of the contract manufacturers shops. So it's something that does happen here in New York that people, if they don't hear about it, they'd otherwise not know. It's a possibility.
Absolutely, Mike. Distribution, inventory, all those things that, startups would consider something they would have to manage in-house is actually available in the state.
So much more than people actually know what's around. And, I know Scale for ClimateTech is, got a couple cohorts under its belt now, and between both of you and prior programs have kind of experienced this similar programming. But what do you both find is the most enjoyable part of working in this program, or just some of the things you get to see? And Mike, we can start with you.
Well, the things that I really enjoy are just seeing when the breakthroughs happen for our participating companies. The analogy is the light goes on, but it just seems kind of corny and clean energy. But the reality hits that here's the way everything now comes together. Having been there as an entrepreneur myself, there's sometimes so many things that seem like they need to be addressed and dealt with all at once. You literally don't know where to start. And the program sets it up so there's a very clear pathway to get there, and things go much, much quicker, smoother. It makes it a lot easier to get things accomplished. So I enjoy it when participants fully embrace and they really make rapid progress. It's just really cool to see.
Shelby, how about you?
I think it's such a unique program. We really encourage our startups to be vulnerable and to share some of the major hiccups that they're facing as they get closer to putting their product to market and scaling up from there. So we encourage them to share out what they're running into so that they can move through it without so many issues getting through that particular problem. So I think allowing a cohort-based program gives this peer-to-peer support that a lot of other incubators and accelerators that I've been introduced to don't have the same emphasis on. And so having that peer-to-peer support means that if you're having a problem with hiring or reading an MSA or trying to decide if you should completely cancel your relationship with your supplier, you can talk to someone who's at your level, who's also facing something similar, and work through those issues together so that you don't come out of the other side of it feeling more convoluted and complicated about that decision, but you feel like you've made the right one.
Yeah, and that segues almost perfectly into the next question that I had for you guys was, without that peer-to-peer connection, I feel like it's really easily to just feel isolated and think these problems are unique. But I'm sure there's patterns and common pitfalls that these teams run into. And I was curious from your guys' perspective, what some of those were and what you see, what you see as Scale for ClimateTech as like a key stepping point in, and how they can kind of get through that. So, and Shelby, I'll let you start this one.
I think we always say you don't know what you don't know. So coming into a program with really high expectations about where you think you may be in manufacturing is probably the most common mistake I see. A lot of these teams are close to a design freeze with the product that they've made so far, but to make that product in a design that is actually manufacturable is a completely different step than what they've accomplished so far. So a lot of them think they're further along than they are. So they make really ambitious goals for the year plus that they spend with us, thinking that they'll be able to accomplish those with us in the program. And sometimes it's a true it feels like a setback for them. And I don't want it to feel like that anymore. So I think our program really is supposed to allow them to see that there's a lot more steps than they maybe have thought of and thought through, which is part of the, you don't know what you don't know. So I think that's a huge common misunderstanding of where they are. We have a tool for this program called the manufacturing readiness level, an MRL. Mike mentioned that was part of developing the initial proposal for this program. So we really try to track companies where they fall within a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being, you know, nothing about manufacturing, 10 being you're a manufacturing genius. And a lot of companies come in thinking that they're a 6 or 7, which is pretty high, and they're probably closer to a 2 or 3, if even that. So it's really interesting to see how they do a self-evaluation and then how they're compared when they talk to someone from RIT or another one of our technical experts who really show them what they're looking for.
Sure, a very sobering moment for most of the new teams.
It can be. But I love to see ambitious goals. So
yeah,
we can help them, you know, facilitate which one they should prioritize within a set of, you know, ambitious goals. Then that's a key win for us too.
Yeah. Yeah. Mike, how about you? What are the things that you've kind of noticed?
Well, you know, all those things that Shelby mentioned. So teams tend to really overestimate where they're at relative to progress towards manufacturing. The next step beyond that is once we get them to a point where they're taking another step forward in manufacturing readiness, they often have miscalculated availability of parts in volume. So it's very typical that they've built prototypes, including those that are pretty well advanced, that are, you know, higher level engineering prototypes, but they've spec'd in parts that just aren't currently available on any reasonable time frame. So partly due to COVID, partly due to just changes in the marketplace, there's lots of products, including things people thought were commodities, that just are not readily available right now. So having to make substitutions, having to, you know, figure out what's a plan B. We've had teams that have had to change dimensions of their enclosures and PCBs and other things to accommodate other components that they need to source, because just did not understand what it does mean when you need to buy more than a few. So that's the next step that we're seeing. The good news is most of them are getting through it and are overcoming it. We've had several companies that now have multi-million-dollar sales revenues now from, you know, starting out with zero. So, you know, it can be done. It's just a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely insane time to start a new company. Sorry, Shelby, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that's just a great highlight from Mike's point of view of when a company first meets a manufacturer, they may not realize that some of the parts that they put into their bill of materials are things that they should absolutely say, this is the part that we want, no changes, where others are more flexible because that manufacturer may have a better supply chain for a particular component. And so we really want to help them understand that there is some ebb and flow, there is some give and take, and that they should really learn from their new relationship with us and their new relationship with a potential CM.
With all that said, do you all think there's have a specific characteristic you think is key to a successful company, or something that that founders should strive for to find success in this field?
Well, I think the real keys when you come into this, come in from a point of learning, and I think that's where the best results come from. If founding team, technical founders are really open to learning from others and embracing whatever changes might come up and adapting to it, that's where the best results show up. So I think that even more so than having access to what you might think is a lot of funding makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think also what we've seen from this last cohort year because of the pandemic is some pretty major pivots in product development, timing, and or strictly just changing their product entirely to meet the new demand of the supply chain shortage of PPE or other things. So it's also a sense of flexibility that you can't necessarily stick to the plan that you put in place. Even before we met you, things may change, and it's okay. A lot of those changes are positive in the long run.
And I know you guys have both kind of shared many different companies that you really enjoyed, but Shelby, do you have like a favorite story of a company or a founder who kind of went through this program and either has an interesting story kind of came up with some of those unique pivots?
So we've had, so far in our first 2 cohorts, we've had 3 of our founders give birth during the program and have missed onboarding because they were literally in the hospital. So I think we always say these are our newest climate tech innovators. So that's been really exciting to see founders juggle the responsibilities of being new parents. A lot of them are some of them are couples. And so it's the 2 founders are, a couple with a new infant, but they're also trying to push their product forward. So I'm thinking of Rise Products in particular, which is a company that upcycles the yeast waste from breweries and turns it into flour and other cooking products. And that team had a baby in the midst of the pandemic and onboarding with us, and they've still managed to really push their product forward despite not having access to breweries, and to find other avenues to make partnerships and create a sale online, an e-commerce marketplace, which is really difficult, but this was the time to do it. So I just like to give a shout out to all those new moms who also continue to push their product development forward.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine they sleep. Mike, how about you? Is there any companies that stand out to you in terms of someone who rose up to a
Chris, they're
challenge?
all standouts to me. So, right, but there are a few things that are I find just especially touching. One is a company that is in our first cohort that otherwise I think the selection team was going to say, well, not quite a fit and let's not do it. We had an advisory board member that was very passionate and wanted us to bring them in and work with them. So we did, and we discovered at the time that they were probably maybe a few weeks away from just running out of cash. Period. Things were not looking so good. There were a few projects that we did that were really tiny. I mean, a few $1,000s. There's just really small projects. But it was enough that it lifted them enough that they could start making and selling some products. And from there, we did a few more other projects that a little bit bigger in scale, but not huge. But they weren't the programs otherwise weren't accessible through any other way. They got guidance in what they literally needed to do next, as opposed to left to wander on their own. What is it that we do, given that we're in these really dire situations? But they get the guidance they need. They're now at a point where they're well past a $2 or $3 million annual run rate for sales. They're hiring people. They have a really nice manufacturing space. They've added equipment, engaged new sales and distribution outlets for their products. It literally is a big turnaround that came about. So I'm especially touched by that because, otherwise we probably wouldn't be talking about them at all. But they're off and running and being very successful and making a difference. So, that's especially rewarding to see.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm sure. I mean, that is a crazy turnaround. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. Obviously, 2020 and this year has just felt like there's endlessly new policy, endlessly new things happening in terms of news and policies and things that are popping up. In terms of the climate tech industry, what signals are you both seeing, either policy side or industry side, that's showing that there's an appetite for these kinds of hardware companies? I know that's kind of a lot of a question, pivot quick, but Mike, I don't know if I will start with you for this one.
Well, in the state of New York, there's things maybe we'll call them regulatory, maybe we'll call them aggressive goals that are set by our government to to really make a difference relative to use of renewable energy generation, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. I think nationally, we're now seeing a dramatic change. I think there's always been attention over the last decade. I would say that even when I was in my much younger years, back into the 70s and 80s, there was still a push, but it didn't have the sort of the really big push and the widespread understanding that exists now for that. So I see that. The others, I think that people are now coming to understand that the things that we need to live life in 2030 and 2050, when we need to be at net zero for carbon emissions, are products that are yet to be developed now. So the work that we're doing in Scale for ClimateTech, I fully expect there'll be some products that we're working with right now that are really and truly going to be at scale by 2035 and by 2040, that people really will need and see as commonplace that otherwise are just interesting at this point.
Sure, I'm very much looking forward to seeing those products because boy, we need them. Shelby, what are some signals that you're seeing that kind of shows that there's there's a lot of potential here?
I think the new administration has showed us that we're ready to jump back into some of the policies that were ignored for the last 4 years. Not to be too political, but reintroducing the Green New Deal and getting back into the Paris Agreement, and small things like that are really going to help us push some initiatives forward. And our program is now seeking companies globally rather than just locally. So I think having access to some of the changes that are already really turning points for other countries will be brought into the United States with the new administration. So I'm hoping that, and this could be anything from electric vehicles and better transportation infrastructure to alternatives for energy storage. I know solar is a super popular topic for everyone who thinks of climate tech. You either think windmills or solar, but those are incredibly important still. And just because other technologies aren't as much in the news doesn't mean that they don't have the same potential. And I think to Mike's point that, in the 70s and 80s, people were talking about it and interested in it, but the technology hadn't necessarily caught up to where we're able to, push out really major changes that can help redirect our climate crisis if we can make it happen. And so our program is really a long game. We want to get these companies into a stable position to get their product to market and scale it up. And that may take more than just the time that they spend with us in our program, but that is a lot of things that we're working towards. So I think us pushing these things forward while we keep in mind that there's a lot of change happening around us is a key way for us to stay engaged.
Awesome. And I know you both touched on parts of this, but I feel like every interview has some kind of COVID question. So this program in hardware, I feel is very hands-on and very in person. And you both had to reinvent how this program would work. And maybe it's a bit of the same too, since there seems to always be folks doing video chats still, but maybe not as extensively. And Shelby, I'll start with you on this one, but in what ways do you think COVID has kind of helped you all pivot to still bring value with this program to teams that are participating?
I think in the early days, when we all thought it would be like 2 weeks to a month that we'd be working from home and doing virtualization, our main pivot was just to make sure that the companies could stay afloat at all, to make sure they had some runway, highlight their key needs. So if that was access to the loans that were available or making decisions about their business. So we really had to keep the focus of the program, which is manufacturing, but also understand that there's a new reality in place with a pandemic. So giving us the space to make sure that companies were going to be able to survive the potential downfall of the pandemic and have enough capital to stay afloat was a huge priority for us. And I think we're incorporating that into how we discuss what people are able to accomplish with us in a virtual setting. So we adapt a little bit more of understanding company needs earlier before they join us in a cohort setting, so that we can really assess what's possible rather than just saying, okay, we're going to help you focus your attention on just these few things while you're with us. It's a more holistic, bigger approach because we have to.
Awesome. Very much looking forward to seeing it too. So should be an interesting couple of months. All right, now the signature question of the podcast. Fast forward 10 years from today. How do you think the climate tech landscape has changed, and who are the key players, and where do you hope to be in it?
I think the pandemic really highlighted some pretty significant inequalities across a lot of the work that we're doing. And so I think over the next 10 years, we're really going to address some environmental justice needs from some of the communities who are the most greatly affected by some of the decisions that we made many, many years ago that have affected those communities the most. So I think we'll find a lot of new entrepreneurs because they've been forced to redirect their efforts from a day-to-day job or, because of the pandemic. So now they have a little bit more space for creative thinking about things they want to do next. And so I think there's going to be a lot of new technologies that emerge from everyone being forced to work from home and recreate their own workflow. That's exciting. I think, again, getting reconnected to the global sphere of what people are interested in doing for climate is going to open new avenues. And as Mike said, as we bring those global communities to New York State, we'll see what changes they bring with them, what technologies they bring with them, what the state is capable of adapting to by not having someone who's local jumping in and making change. Obviously, transportation is huge. We really need to get a grip on electric vehicles, catch up with the EU, make sure that there's other opportunities for folks who maybe don't want to own a car, but want access to other better infrastructure for transportation. That would be really nice. I think that's a huge open space. In 10 years, I mean, that's when we're supposed to be meeting our first GHG goals. So I think we better get on it. But I think we're in good shape. I think I've said a few times too that this is a long game. So companies we're working with now, if we get them, successfully manufacturing and their products to market, then we will see their impact in the next 10 years. So that's my hopeful piece, is that we'll have a more diverse group of founders that we can support as we move into addressing real problems outside of just climate action.
Love it. Mike, 10 years from now, what do you see? What are you thinking?
10 years from now, I'm thinking that there's got to be lots of changes. I support all those things that Shelby had to say. I think there's yet other things that we need to touch on for real sort of justice and equity across the community in a larger sense. There are things that need to be done just in our infrastructure. So to achieve the goals that are set out to have really be at net zero emissions for greenhouse gases in that kind of time frame, it means that there's yet a whole nother set, a redoubling again of all the renewable energy sources and non-emitting generation sources that need to be brought online. The energy grid itself, the thing that distributes power across the state, it needs to change and adapt, because things that are currently coming from solar and wind, these are intermittent power sources. So addressing needs for energy storage, very large. There is a big push in the state government for energy storage to be brought online, but right now it would round to zero for how much is actually available that's not hydroelectric. So there's going to be a big transformation in a 10-year time, with many new things that are brought on, in particular into the grid. We'll need to reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming, and I think few New Yorkers are aware that energy consumption has actually decreased to about 6% over the last 5 years. COVID also has had a decrease as well, and we'll have to see what happens when that is no longer a factor. But the trend is lower energy consumption across the state, but that trend needs to continue. with new sources that are not greenhouse gas emitting brought online. Along with that, I think we have some people in our programs now that'll be contributors. So we do have participating companies that are working on things that are related to fuel cells. We have several that are working on grid scale energy storage, both in things we might say is a battery-like device, and some things are using kinetic energy, which I think is just really interesting. We have lots of folks that are working on different types of HVAC energy conservation systems that will need to be out there and be in place. And we're working with companies that are working on technologies that connect different devices onto the grid and monitor energy that's on the electrical grid at the utility scale. So I'm quite hopeful that over the next decade, those will actually get into production and in use to create a clean energy future for us in 10 years.
I think I echo that absolutely. And I think food waste and ag tech is another huge industry that if we can build that from the ground up and get it involved in education. When I was a kid, we learned recycle, reduce, reuse. There's so much more to it than that. So I would love for education to get engaged with the options for climate technology. And our kids are learning in a digital age, so I think it's an easier way to build that into curriculums these days. And I really hope that at some point they make Wi-Fi and internet access a utility so that everyone has access to that kind of information and education so that the technologies can continue to grow. Fantastic.
Very much looking forward to seeing these solutions come into play in the next 10 years and what Scale for ClimateTech will be putting out. So Mike and Shelby, thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with me today about this. I know Zoom fatigue is real, so I appreciate you adding on to this. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure to spend time with Mike.
Thanks, Shelby.
All right. If you want to follow our Forward Faster podcast series, please go to nextcorps.org/podcast. So that's nextcorps.org/podcast. Or go to Spotify or iTunes and search NextCorps Forward Faster. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.